1. Thought crimes on Capitol Hill. If you thought the censorship fight or the culture war was relegated to Twitter, wait till you hear from your elected representatives in Congress. 2. Burn the American flag. Cool. Desecrate the trans flag. Vandalism. 3. Why guaranteed money for Deshaun Watson, but not Lamar Jackson? It's the Will Cain Podcast on Fox News Podcast. What's up? And welcome to the weekend. As always, I hope you will download, rate, and review this podcast wherever you get your audio entertainment. Apple, Spotify, or at Fox News Podcast. It helps expand the community if you leave a comment or leave a 5-star review. Man, I've got a bad habit. I'm a binger, but not in substance abuse. I continue to be probably one of the worst offenders when it comes to binging content. I just binged House of Dragon. Now, it took me a little while because I didn't want to maintain an HBO subscription, and I really wasn't sold in some type of, pop culture zeitgeist that felt like everybody's in on House of Dragon, at least the way they were with Game of Thrones. And I dug Game of Thrones. Not always. There were times when I thought it drug or certain plot lines got too much attention or others too little attention. But I dug Game of Thrones. And let me tell you something. Selling me on something from the outside that is about dragons, and I'm almost a guarantee out. Not into elves, magic, wizards, dragons. Not into Dungeons of Dragons. Not really into Lord of the Rings. But I got sucked in by Game of Thrones because of, no, not the nudity, because of the political intrigue. I don't mean Republicans and Democrats. I just think it's actually a really fascinating look into, yes, individual psychology, greed, ambition, lust for power, but more than that, political psychology, group psychology, the quest together for power. What's the role of principle? When does principle become a weakness? Probably in about episode 2 of Game of Thrones. The good guy doesn't always win just in life, because true redemption and true reward, we know, are found in the fulfillment of virtue itself and an afterlife. But it kind of disavows you of this notion that there's such a thing as karma. Do the right thing and it all comes out in the wash. Ultimately, life will bend in your direction if you bend the right way. I used to think that. I don't anymore. I now think you do the right thing because it's the right thing. Not even because you will be rewarded in an afterlife, simply because it is the right thing. It's its own reward. You will not be showered with riches. You won't ultimately get the job. You won't ultimately see the good guy rise to the throne. I love that about Game of Thrones. But it's not predictable and not cynical that the bad guy always wins either. And so it's like life. And eventually I dialed into House of Dragon. And I know something about myself. I've said this the other night and hanging out with a few people. A good measurement for a piece of content for me is how much time do I spend thinking or researching that content after I've seen the last episode. Do I go to Wikipedia? Do I want to learn more? And most of the time that's about nonfiction, but not always. There are pieces of content that are fiction. I'll go deep dive. And with Game of Thrones, it also lends to another obsession of mine, which is a visual representation of my deep dive, the map. I love maps. I have maps. I've collected maps from all the places that I've lived in this great country. I have old maps, 1800s maps of, yes, of course, Texas. Every good Texan has to have a map of Texas. I have maps of Los Angeles, of the state of California, with every governor up through the moment where that map was published, framing the map of California. I have numerous maps of Montana. I have maps of Hawaii. I have maps of New York and New York City. I love maps, and I know a couple of other maps I want to get. And some of them are really around fiction. Well, first of all, I want a map that follows the great cattle trails. The Goodnight Loving Trail, the Chisholm Trail. I love those stories, that time period. I love that journey. That's what that's about, a journey. I would love a Lewis and Clark map. I would like a map of the houses in Game of Thrones and House of Dragon, even though it's fictional, Westeros. I find myself, when I was watching Game of Thrones and now again watching House of Dragon, like, I want to picture, where's Westeros? Where's the Narrow Sea? Where's Essos? Where's this house from? Where's the North? Where is Casterly Rock? Where are the Lannisters' castle? I want to know and visualize and picture it all. I love me some maps. And because I was inspired to go deep dive, I loved House of Dragon. So, there you go. One of my vices, binging content. That, I think, lends to one of my virtues, collecting maps. Story number 1, accountability, revelation on Capitol Hill. Yesterday was a day of multiple committees meeting on Capitol Hill, seeking accountability and finding revelation, finding exposure, finding enlightenment in the way that the thought process of our elected members of Congress in the United States of America. Let's start with a hearing on Capitol Hill about the Twitter files. Journalists Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger were invited before a subcommittee on Congress led by Congressman Jim Jordan, where they were invited to discuss the Twitter files, how Twitter censored certain points of view, certain individuals, and did it in league with, at the bequest, at the demand, of the federal government. Now, if you want to hear Michael and Matt's full testimony, I encourage you to go check it out at cspan.org. But I'm going to play for you a couple of clips. I think it's only fair, and I think it's accountable for me to say whenever I play a clip for you, I'm obviously providing you a slice of the pie, one narrow portal into the picture. The reason I say that is I saw one of the most repulsive commentators within the news media that I believe, I guess unshockingly, but still disconcertingly, happens to be a law professor, Elie Mystal, I think is his name. Grab a clip of Matt Taibbi in an interaction with one of the most unimpressive members of Congress, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and say, Matt Taibbi's having a bad day on Congress. Well, that was the exact opposite of my takeaway. And he gave one little pinhole's picture of light into an exchange during this 2.5-hour committee. I, too, am going to give you just a couple of clips, and I'm going to give you my context. But I think it's important that you and I acknowledge I'm giving you a slice of the pie, a picture of 2.5 hours of testimony, because my interest is not in manipulating you. My interest is enlightenment. So, first of all, I found it absolutely fascinating that in this interaction at Congress, there is a Congress member from, I believe, the Virgin Islands. Her name is Representative Stacey Plaskett. She seems to be one of the ranking members on this committee. And she suggested that Taibbi and Schellenberger were guilty of posing a direct threat to anyone who opposes them. Here, I want you to listen to this moment in the hearing on the Twitter files. There you go. There you can hear Representative Plaskett say exactly as I said, that these two individuals represent a direct threat to anyone who opposes them. Now, how did Taibbi and Schellenberger represent a direct threat? There's no other way to see it than that they tell the truth. So the truth is a threat, of course, in an empire of lies. Truth is the threat. There's a Twitter follow that I enjoy named Jim Treacher. He said the following. He said, if you think the truth is a threat, you may not be the good guys. He's exactly right. If you believe that you need a lie in order to retain your, safety, maybe you're not the good guy. It's really, really hard to escape this visual. And I think it's not just a visual. I think it's important. I think it tells the story. Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger are, or were at one time, and may still be, men of the left. Journalists, yes. Probably Democrats. Matt Taibbi has had, unflattering words to say about me, at least on one occasion in my career. I was right, of course, as usual. It happened to be, I remember the exact story. It was during the NFL draft combine, right about now. And one of the players was asked, I can't remember what the question was, a provocative question. Are you gay? Was your mom a prostitute? I don't know. Something that in casual conversation, you'd be like, what? You want to step outside? But I said at that time, I understand what's happening here. They're trying to get a grip on the prospective draftee, the player, his mindset, his temper, his explosion. Is the question appropriate? No. That's sort of the point. To see what happens on the field when something honestly much worse is said. Do I have a player that gets a 15-yard penalty? Do I have a player that gets kicked out of the game? Do I have a player that will get suspended? Without endorsing the question, I understood the utilitarian value of the question. To that, I think, Taibbi, who was marching in lockstep to the groupthink on this issue, said, and I quote, Will Cain is an idiot. Cool. Whatever. The point is, Schellenberger and Taibbi, at least at one time, if not still today, self-identified as of the left or a Democrat. And there they are on Capitol Hill being not just cross-examined, but actively insulted by Democrats. Plaskett called them so-called journalists. Now, say what you will about Schellenberger, Taibbi, and, I don't think, and Schellenberger's a friend of this program, I've never required, nor do I even think it noteworthy that we agree with someone on all points of view, but it's hard to not call these men journalists. I mean, we're talking about multiple awards, multiple best-selling books, multiple columns, multiple publications. Not everybody considers it a compliment. But I think it would fit the definition of a journalist. It doesn't fit Plaskett's definition of a journalist because it doesn't fit Plaskett's narrative. That somehow she now thinks narrative is journalism. But the point of this is, here is Democrats being insulted by Democrats regarding an issue, censorship, where you're talking about people being obliterated off of Twitter, obliterated like RFK Jr., censored. So Democrats being insulted by Democrats over tweets being censored from Democrats. It's not simply partisan. Oh, it is partisan, by the way. It's pointed out by Taibbi and Schellenberger, who say, look, I'm not a Republican. 10-1 was the censorship on Republicans over Democrats on Twitter at the behest of the government. But the point is, this is so much more than partisanship. This is about the weaponization of and the protection of a regime. Groupthink, a point of view, an acceptable line of thought, jobs. Jobs, how about this? To continue on this path. The day before on Capitol Hill, several people testified regarding the origins of the COVID virus and whether or not it leaked from a Wuhan lab. Dr. Robert Redfield testified. He was the former director of the CDC. And he talks about how he was boxed out of conversations by Dr. Anthony Fauci and others, Dr. Francis Collins, because he began to think early in the process, hey, this has the markers of something that did not occur in nature. All of a sudden, he was boxed out. And then, as he testified on Congress, he was called a racist. Listen. There's Redfield experiencing what's become a very blunt tool. Racist. Glenn Greenwald said this well. The left has turned claims of racism into their toy. I mean, it's just worthless. Quite honestly, it's meaningless. It's a blunted knife. It's a dull edge. It has no effect. It's been struck against every rock. Here, let me give you another example. We're going to come back. We're going to come back to both Redfield and to Taibbi and Schellenberger. But how about this? Another friend of the Will Cain podcast, Alex Epstein, was testifying on Congress yesterday regarding energy. And Congresswoman Cori Bush took the time before he got to speak to say this about Epstein testifying before Congress. Listen. Racist, racism, white supremacy. Disregard his testimony. So first of all, let's say this. Bush is a race-baiting idiot. Without indulging in name-calling, we sometimes have to err on the side of accuracy. She's a race-baiting idiot. Bush suggests in this, let's think about this for just a moment. Bush suggests, and remember, she's elected to Congress, that all cultures are of equal value. That if one suggests that one culture is superior to another, then that person is indulging in white supremacy. And Epstein does such a genius job of smacking this down. Okay, first of all, it is amoral, positively amoral, meaning against all concepts of morality, to pretend that all cultures are equal. Okay? That's the kind of thing that sounds controversial, that is obvious on its face. Not all cultures are equal. Okay, you would value a culture that values individual freedom over one that deprives others of rights. Right? The one that values individual freedom, superior. The one that deprives individual rights, inferior. How about even beyond systems of justice and law? How about a culture that incentivizes health and longevity, longer lives, better health care? How about a culture where the lifespans increase and people have access to better foods? How about technological advances in farming? How about intelligence and learned knowledge about hygiene? How about all that adding up to lower infant mortality rates, better health outcomes? You would argue that a culture that perpetuates better health outcomes and longer lives, that diminishes death, would be a good thing, you know, diminish death, is superior to one that increases death. You would think that one that does that is inferior. That which increases death. Is that controversial? Or is that obviously true? How about this? How about cultural mores? Is a culture that perpetuates female genital mutilation not inferior to a culture that says, you know, cutting off girls' privates, not cool? Is it controversial to say that culture would be superior? No, it's amoral to pretend that all cultures are equal. Some are superior. So in the pursuit of morality, we seek to all bend towards the arc of a superior culture. Secondarily, Bush says, you know, I'm a descendant, many of us are descendants, black or brown, of these cultures that you incorrectly describe as inferior. And that is white supremacy. No, it is racist, Representative Bush. You are perpetuating racism to describe inferior cultures as inextricably tied to skin color. Cultures are a collection of practices based on a set of ideas. They're not baked into your genetic code. And therefore, if you believe inferior cultures are inextricably tied to race, you are the racist. Douglas Murray has talked about this on his podcast. It's fascinating when talking about that colonialism isn't the racist vice from A to Z, start to finish, easily hand-waved away as is painted in popular culture. The very project of colonialism impugns the idea that everyone can have access to superior ideas. He talks about in his podcast with a professor from Portland State that one wouldn't attempt to colonize a dog because a dog can't adopt the practices and mores and ideas of a superior way of life. but human beings can. And if that's the case, all human beings are equal, have the same equal potential for greatness. That is anti-racism. That's the opposite of racism. That's seeing every human being capable of the same judgment, merit, and accomplishment. But Congresswoman Bush, one who believes that your ideas cannot be separated from your skin color, you are the racist. So that was taking place as well on Capitol Hill. Let's go back to Dr. Robert Redfield now in his testimony talking about being called a racist. Glenn Greenwald said it's the toy of the left. It's just a toy to dismiss, as we saw with Bush. It's been fetishized. It's been blunted. But still, for someone who's maybe not used to the strike of that dull knife, it cuts for former CDC Director Robert Redfield. But beyond his emotional well-being, he gave some very fascinating intellectual testimony on the origins of the COVID virus. He said in September of 2019, remember, we all learned about it in January, February of 2020, and then our world shut down in March of 2020. He said in September of 2019, the Wuhan lab did three things that suggest it escaped from a lab. Number one, they deleted all the genetic code, all the strains of the virus they've been working on in Wuhan. Deleted them. Highly irregular practice. Number two, they did away with civilian oversight and brought in the Chinese military to oversee the Wuhan lab. And number three, they brought in a private contractor to change the ventilation system inside of the Wuhan lab. All of that pointing to guilt. And then, of course, we fast forward to the point where Redfield is boxed out of these communications with Dr. Anthony Fauci. Fauci, by January, February, is full on in cover-up mode. He's suppressing and manipulating anyone who counters the idea that it originated from a wet market. They point to two scientists who reached out to Fauci and said, hey, this has all the markers of human manipulation of a lab. Fauci quickly wrangles those two scientists. Those two scientists change their point of view. They write a paper on proximal origin, that it came from a Wuhan lab, a 180-degree turn from their original proposition. And then, about a month later, we find out they got a $9 million grant at the behest of Fauci. 9 million reasons why they did a 180 and changed their mind. Fauci's in full-on cover-up mode. Why? Because he's culpable. Because he's guilty. He's still today, among many, considered an untouchable saint. But he is guilty of funding gain-of-function research, of specifically and directly the Wuhan lab, of unleashing the pandemic on the population of the globe. That was suppressed and censored and affected our lives, and it's still important today because that's what Fauci did. What about all the scientists that marched in lockstep with him? Well, they aren't scientists. They're faith preachers, following the faith of scientism. And that's a problem today, as is the ongoing gain-of-function research across this world. Now, that took place as well. Let's rewind all the way now back to Taibbi and Schellenberger and the suppression, often through claims of racist, like with Alex Epstein, or through government coercion and cover-up, as with Dr. Robert Redfield. Various points of view on Twitter is revealed by Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger. It was fascinating to see Democrats openly attack Democrats in defense of a regime to censor speech. Representative Sylvia Garcia of Texas, a Democrat, attempted to get Matt Taibbi to reveal his sources on this on numerous occasions. Who's your source? Who's your source? This is Democrats now, fully antagonistic to free speech, fully embracing censorship. At one time, this would have been completely outside the ideology of the left to force a journalist to reveal his source. But that's not the left today. No, that's not for Democrats. Now it's groupthink. It's lockstep. It's acceptable thought. It's protection of the regime. Even if the regime is a bumbling fool. I want you to listen to one more clip. This is Sanchez questioning now Michael Schellenberger on his sources and Bari Weiss. There you go. Would you describe yourself as a threesome? Everybody giggled. Schellenberger, Taibbi. I mean, what is this? Is this in a separate line of questioning, Garcia revealed proudly, I think, is she didn't understand Substack. Is it like a web page? She doesn't know who Bari Weiss is. She doesn't know what a threesome is. She's perfectly qualified for Congress. A bumbling fool has an apparatus of protection and weaponization around him. It is our regime. And it is groupthink and censorship, and it will suppress thought crimes on Capitol Hill. Just a day and a half on Capitol Hill. Story number 2. You can burn the American flag, but don't dare you vandalize the flag of trans. In the state of Florida, I'm trying to figure out what city this took place in. There was a trans flag in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, painted on a street. It's the latest flag. I think it's up to date. It's got the rainbow flag, but then on the left-hand side of the flag, it's got a chevron, with all the trans colors and stripes. It's got them all, I think. It's up to date. It's white, pink, blue, brown, black, and then the full rainbow from top to bottom. And they painted it on the street. All right, well, some people drove on it. Yep, they drove on the flag because it's on the road. And some might have burned a little rubber, left some skid marks, some black streaks of rubber across the trans flag. And this is vandalism. Susanna Bryan, who's a reporter for the Sun Sentinel in Fort Lauderdale, a reporter for the Sun Sentinel, tweeted from a Fort Lauderdale source, "It appears that the pride flag at Sebastian and Seabreeze has been possibly defaced less than a month after its debut. Shameful. Some are hoping surveillance cameras might shed light on who did this." Listen to the language here. From a Fort Lauderdale source. A source? Like somebody who walked on the sidewalk next to the street and noticed some skid marks? Make sure you protect the source there, Sue. This is shameful, she says, and they're hoping surveillance cameras might shed light on who did this. What? Drove on Sebastian and Seabreeze? Burned a little rubber? This is insanity. Christina Pushaw, who is the spokesperson for Governor Ron DeSantis, tweeted the following: "Liberals have fought for the right to burn the American flag as free speech. Yet the same people want to use surveillance cameras to track down whoever drove over a Progress Pride flag painted on the road and charge them with a hate crime." And let's not overlook that. It's a flag painted on the road, and you're calling it vandalism that somebody left skid marks. Well, first of all, maybe don't paint your flag on the road. Second, don't expect other people to worship your symbols. Your symbol is not protected from vandalism, or at least it shouldn't be, because, as I am made aware by another journalist at the Sun Sentinel, Scott Travis, he's a senior journalist at the Sun Sentinel, part of the 2019 Pulitzer Prize winning team. He wrote in response, "It's vandalism. The exact same thing happened in Delray Beach." Oh, really? Delray Beach? What happened in Delray Beach? So I clicked through to that article, and it's absolutely fascinating. Listen to this. This is from, of course, the Sun Sentinel. "After man ruined gay pride mural, he is ordered to write an essay on the victims of the Pulse nightclub massacre." This is from April of 2022. "A driver admitted to defacing an LGBTQ street mural." Well, dang it. Now it says I have to be a subscriber and signed in to the Sun Sentinel to continue with this inanity. I'm not subscribing, Sun Sentinel, but I did read enough before it clicked away to learn that a judge found a man guilty of defacing this gay pride mural on the street by spinning his tires and leaving black marks. And guess what his punishment was? He had to write an essay on the shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. You guys remember that? I can only hope, I pray that this man was educated enough to write and strong enough to write an essay for that judge that said that was not a homophobic hate crime. Oh, yes, it took place at a gay nightclub, but that was a Muslim terrorist, all facts now confirm, who did not know where he was walking into that night. It was his second choice of locations to create a mass killing. And as he walked in, he said to the security guards, "Where are all the women?" He didn't know when walking in that it was a gay nightclub. Didn't care. Once he got there, go ahead and commit his horrific crime. And then, of course, we're off and running, though. The popular narrative is he did it because, of homophobia. This had nothing to do with homophobia. It had to do with Islamic extremism. I hope that guy wrote that essay and shone some light to that ignorant judge. What more, the judge can't require him, I wouldn't think, to have I need to see how that went down. Group or right think in his essay. I didn't even know judges could require you to write an essay. I didn't know driving on the road could be vandalism either. Yet here we are, the second horrific hate crime in the South Florida area of trans flags on the road. What's going on in Florida? Story number 3. Guaranteed money for Deshaun Watson, but not for Lamar Jackson. We talked about this in the last episode of the Will Cain podcast. I said the New York Jets need to make a move, not for Aaron Rodgers, but for Lamar Jackson. It's going to be hard, and I understand why they may not. Lamar Jackson is representing himself with the Baltimore Ravens, and they have placed the non-exclusive franchise tag on Lamar Jackson, which means that another team could come and make a bid on Lamar. The Ravens have a right to match, and if they don't, they can get 2 first-round picks from anyone that comes to match. Now, first of all, it's weird that a bunch of teams have chosen not to match, not to go after Lamar Jackson. Several teams, the Panthers, the Falcons, the Commanders, have said they're not interested in Lamar Jackson. And that all of a sudden has a lot of people going, what's going on? Why are all these teams not interested? It's the same time, by the way, Daniel Jones of the New York Giants got a contract where he's getting like $40 million a year. And Saquon Barkley, their running back, just got franchise tagged for a 1-year deal. As a fan of the Dallas Cowboys, and I think I can speak for the fans of the Philadelphia Eagles and the Washington Commanders as well, we are really happy for Daniel Jones and the New York Giants. I'm happy to see that those two, the New York Giants, will be led by Daniel Jones for the foreseeable future. By the way, I don't even think Daniel Jones is a bad quarterback. But I love to see $40 million tied up in a quarterback that I do not think, can win you the division. Ryan Clark tweeted, "We live in a world where Daniel Jones is $40 million a year and Lamar Jackson can't get the contract he wants." I don't know what he's insinuating here. The latest quarterback up for free agency is usually the highest paid quarterback. It's all about timing. And surely he's not suggesting it's about race. But after Kendrick Perkins on ESPN, I don't know. After Corey Bush on Capitol Hill, I don't know. Everything about race? Because just last year, you'd have to point out that Deshaun Watson, who is black, got guaranteed. Patrick Mahomes, who is black, is the highest paid quarterback. And you just keep going down this list. But it does bring up this. Why? Why would the Falcons? Why would the Panthers? Why would so many teams be in on Deshaun Watson but out on Lamar Jackson? Why? And I think the answer is twofold. They don't want to give guaranteed contracts, but yet Deshaun Watson got a guaranteed contract with all his accusations, over 30 of sexual harassment. Why would they give guaranteed money to Deshaun Watson but not to Lamar Jackson? And then the answer lies, I don't think in collusion, but in understood alignment of 32 good old boys. Don't go after my player unless you want me to go after yours. The Ravens want Jackson. They want to keep him. They want to work out a deal. They don't want to do guaranteed money. And most owners don't want to do guaranteed money. So owners don't want to step in, try to steal another team's quarterback, give guaranteed money because it sets a precedent. A precedent that's a little bit like a nuclear arms race. Then everybody's trying to get everyone else's quarterback, and they're willing to give guaranteed money, which none of the owners want to give away. Deshaun Watson was the aberration, and it's one that the NFL owners are going to have to grapple with. And it wasn't just the Browns. The Falcons and others were ready to do a similar deal with a quarterback that certainly doesn't offer as much as Lamar Jackson. Is it collusion? No. Is it racism? No. Is it good old boy? Yes. When it comes to the NFL and Lamar Jackson. That's going to do it for me today. I will talk to you again on Monday. If you would, share this podcast with your friends. Leave a 5-star review. I'll see you next time. Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain Podcast for full episodes right now.